everybody, welcome to the show. My name is Amanda Ostrander. I am a teacher-turned-homeschool mom, and this is Raising A to Z, a place where we talk about all things homeschooling. And today we're going to talk about what to do when your kids are refusing to do work. What do you do when your kids don't want to work? When you wake up in the morning and pull out their workbooks and the entire session is basically fighting and screaming and tears and refusal and everything is taking twice as long as it should. What do you do? First off, you take a deep breath and realize you're not alone and it's totally normal. Even families who have a homeschool consultant and have teachers for parents, like me, our kids still do work refusal on occasion. Everybody who has homeschooled kids will deal with work refusal at some point in their lives. It is totally normal. It is valid. It can be frustrating, and I understand that, but it is normal and you are not alone. Okay? So today I'm going to go through what do we do when we're dealing with work refusal and basically give you kind of like a flow chart of what to do depending on different circumstances. The first thing we're going to do when we're doing our little flow chart here is basically, is it sporadic or is it a reoccurring daily issue? So if it's sporadic, your kids randomly woke up this morning and you pull the books out and they're like, I don't want to do it. I can't do it. And they're crying or whatever. And you're like, this is not you. You never give me an issue. What is going on here? If it's random and it's just out of the blue, that's sporadic. If it's a regular occurrence, if this is a fight every single day, if it's a fight more than once a week, I would say probably more than twice a week that you're having issues with, like fighting and work refusal, that would be more of a regular occurrence. Okay. So if it is a sporadic occurrence, let's go down that tree branch for a second. So if it's a sporadic occurrence, the first thing we need to do is look at what is going on around our child at the time. Did they have a rough night? Have they been ill? Did they have a really crazy busy weekend? Are there things happening in your family that are kind of throwing them off? What is happening around them that's making today just be too much? And that's a really important thing to remember when we're talking about work refusal. Kids when they're refusing to work, they're trying to communicate. They don't have the vocabulary. They don't have the understanding of what's the problem necessarily, but they're trying to tell us that something's not right. And oftentimes, especially if it's sporadic, they're tired, they're sick, they're overwhelmed. And it comes out as frustration and refusal. And if we can look at that and see what it is around them that is the problem, we can either address the issue, like, oh, do you need a nap? Do you need a snack? Oh my, I can't even tell you the number of times my kids have fought with me. And I'm like, hey, do you want a cheese string? Give them a cheese string in 10 minutes and they're back. No problem. Like they're just going through a growth spurt and they're hungry. Awesome. Feed them and then move on. Like if we can fix the problem quickly, let's do that. If that's like, let's not make it a bigger issue. Let's not fight over things like, oh, they're hungry. Well, you just ate breakfast. You can eat it again when we're done. Just feed them. Like, it's not worth it. If we can fix the issue quickly, awesome. Like I said, if it's just an issue of getting a piece of cheese or an apple while they're working, go for it. If it's something bigger, like they're tired, they had an overly busy weekend, there's lots of things that are going on, maybe we can take the time and work on something that I like to call is listening to our bodies and saying, hey, you're tired. You're really busy. These things this happened in our family this week. It's a little overwhelming. Let's take some time and just take a mental health day, or let's cut back on what we're going to do. Hey, I know I was going to ask you to do 2 pages of math and a spelling and a phonics and whatever. Let's just do 1 page of math and 1 phonics. Can we do that? Awesome. If you can't and you decide, hey, we're just going to take a mental health day, go for it. That's an awesome option. I think that's one of the incredible things about homeschooling is that we can listen to our kids when they're saying they're not capable of functioning. I saw this all the time in schools when I was teaching. I particularly remember this one day I had this poor kid come in and he could not do anything. all day at school, was absolutely a mess. And when parents picked him up that night, I was like, oh, he had a rough night. They're like, oh yeah, we got in from a hockey tournament at like 2 a.m. last night. He was 2nd grade. So he was 7. Yeah, 7. 2 a.m. and then he was at school at 8. There's no way that he got enough sleep that night. And considering I have a brother who played hockey, I know what happens at hockey tournaments. He didn't get enough sleep all weekend. So now he's here at school and his behavior is off and he can't focus or function. And, he's exhausted. And because, in schools, attendance and perfect attendance is pushed so hard, it's a negative, like it doesn't necessarily help kids when they actually need the break. So as homeschoolers, I think it's important that we find ways to respect our kids' energy and their time and teach them how to do that for themselves, to take the mental health breaks, to take the physical health breaks when they need them, and to respect that their bodies are telling them something and to listen to that. So you can take the entire day off and just say, we're done. It's totally okay, especially if it's sporadic. Like if you're taking 1 day off a month, the world will not collapse. You know what I mean? Like it'll be fine. So the other thing you can do is if your kids are like, we are not interested, we just can't get through it today, you can switch it up. It's a great time to do something like, maybe you're like, hey, instead of us doing spelling, phonics, and grammar, do you want to like go to bed and cuddle and I'll read to you? Like I can read either a picture book or we can read a couple extra chapters of that novel we've been working on. Like we can do something like that. Hey, do you want another option would be like a board game. There's lots of really like educational board games out there that might take the stress and like the overwhelming feeling of like looking at workbook pages off and maybe pull out like a board game. It's also, if that's like too much for them, a documentary is a great option. There's tons of documentaries out there that are kid friendly and like it would be a great option and it's something that would be fairly easy for you to like pull out for them. And so you're still getting something educational in, you're still getting something that they're learning something from, but it's just taking the request level down. It's taking like what they need to produce down. They're still absorbing. They're just not having to physically put out and produce, answers, produce worksheets, produce writing. They can just kind of take some time and absorb. And it's a lot less stress for them. So that's what I recommend if it is a very sporadic work refusal day. It's fine. Take a break, do something else that's educational, but it's like low demand, or, negotiate and say just less work. Like there's lots of things that we can do to work with our kids when they are overwhelmed and they're having a sporadic day of just like not wanting to work. Lots of options. But what do you do when you are facing work refusal on a regular basis? When it's happening 2, 3, 4 times a week, or every day? Like, what do you do when that is your reality? If it is a regular occurrence, it's time to look a little bit deeper. We're going to go down this branch of the tree now. If it is happening regularly, we need to take some time and really dive into what is the issue. The first issue that I often see is parents who have pulled their kids from school and they never deschooled. This is fundamentally a problem. If you have pulled your kids out of school and you have not deschooled, you are going to face work refusal at a much higher rate because you have not given your kids a chance to adjust. They have not had a chance to heal, and they have not had a chance to understand that things are different. And you have not had a chance to understand that things are different and that your day is not going to look like school. It is fundamentally important that you take time to deschool. I have a whole video on that. I will put the link here. But deschooling is going to be the most important thing that you can do, especially if you're coming out of the public school system with trauma. Whether it is work refusal issues at school, whether it is trauma like bullying, maybe there has been like a ton of frustrations over subjects or like difficulties with a teacher or a principal. If there's been any kind of like trauma at school and you're not deschooling, you're not giving your kids a chance to heal emotionally, physically, and to adjust. And that is going to really, really cause it's going to increase your likelihood of work refusal. So if you're having issues like that, first thing you need to make sure is that you actually deschooled and took enough time to deschool. It's not a 1 week process. Unless your kid was in school for 3 days, it's not a 1 week process. It's going to be a little bit longer than that. Maybe a lot longer than what you were anticipating, but you need to do it. The next thing I look at is if you've deschooled, are you doing too much and is it too hard? So coming out of that, is it too much is a huge, huge thing. Doing too much is very common in homeschooling, and it's very common in families who are coming out of the public school system. I find families that have homeschooled from the beginning don't tend to have that same doing too much. It tends to be less common. Coming out of the public school system, because you've spent so much time, and deschooling is hard and it's an ongoing process. I am a teacher by trade, and I still have to take moments and deschool myself, because I have to remind myself that even though I've been homeschooling for the last 6 years, 5 years, 6 years, almost 6 years, there are things that don't need to happen because we're not school. And so sometimes we have to either remind ourselves about that. But doing too much is very, very common. The number of first graders, parents of first and second graders who are doing a 3-hour work time in the morning and expecting 3 hours, I expect them to work from 9 till 3 or 9 till noon, is astounding. Because not only is that not realistic, and yes, you're going to have work refusal for sure. It's not good for anybody. You're putting too much in. It's too much for them. The rule of thumb when it comes to homeschooling is 20 to 30 minutes per grade. So a first grader should be doing, 20 to 30 minutes of seated work. So if you're expecting them to do 3 hours of paper to pencil work, it's not going to happen. It is unrealistic to expect that of them. And you're going out of their frustration of feeling like it's too much, because their little brains cannot handle that much information and sitting still for that long. You're going to get work refusal and fights, and it's going to happen. We don't want to do too much. Now, sometimes I know some people are like, that's just not enough time. That doesn't mean that that's 30 minutes of seated workbook work. Now, if you want to hey, we're going to read a story, and then we're going to do some workbooks, and then we're going to do a craft, or we're going to do art, or we're going to do some bake. If you're going to do something else, that's fine. But I'm saying in terms of actual pencil to paper workbook time, you got to make sure you're not doing too much, because that's where a lot of kids are getting their refusal from. Kids are not refusing art time for the most part. They're refusing the pencil and paper part that comes first. So if you're doing too much, my first thing is you need to scale back. Scale way back. Start definitely looking at core things and finding ways to make it less. I always say you don't need to teach more than 3 subjects at a time. If you're teaching 3 subjects consistently, you're doing great. We do math, we do language, we do 1 unit study. And it alternates between science and social studies. But anyway, if you can find 2 or 3 subjects to do on a consistent basis, you can probably get through a lot more, and your kids will be a lot more happy and a lot more willing to work, because it's not overwhelming to them. They're not frustrated and they're not overly tired. So start by taking things out. Things that are not necessary, things that are not fundamentally all the extras, scale it way down. And then after you find it find your level where everyone's happy. If you want to add something, add 1 thing. And if everyone's good there, then maybe add another. So if you're saying, hey, I'm going to scale down to just language and math for a bit, do that. That's a great idea. Then after, let's say a month, and you're like, hey, this is working, I'm going to add science. We're going to do a science unit. We're going to do some science. And if everyone's happy with that, then great. And maybe a month later, you're like, hey, I also want to introduce geography. And then you up the ante, and everyone's like, yeah, that's awesome. Or everyone's like, no, that's too much. Then you can see kind of where your kids are hitting at. So remember, it's always easier to add things than it is to take away. We need to remember that with kids. So if you're finding your kids are fighting you, first off, scale way back, scale down to an appropriate number of time, like amount of time, and a lower number of subjects, and then find what's comfortable for everybody and then add in. The other thing we want to look at is it too hard? This is a very common thing, especially for kids who are coming out of the public school system, especially if they have had academic struggles in the system. Are they missing things that are making what you're doing right now too hard? It's very easy to compare what your kid is doing to someone else. It's very easy to compare what one kid is doing to the other. So that's the first thing we need to remember, is that we can't compare our kids to anybody. Our kids are on their own path and their own journey. And as homeschooling parents, we are respecting that path and that journey and helping them to continuously move forward and to continuously make bigger steps and bigger strides and become better at something. But if we're looking at it and we're like, hey, we're going to do multiplication, and your kid's like, I don't even understand how to do addition and I can't skip count, your kids are going to struggle with multiplication. So sometimes it is not just taking a step back. It is like in terms of the amount of time, it's taking a step back in terms of levels. Maybe even though your kid is in grade 4, you need to take them back to grade 3. And if you're taking a step back, what I often recommend is get a cheap curriculum. So if you're like, hey, this is working really well, so go to like a Costco or whatever and pick up like a Math Smart or like something like that, because it's going to be like $20. And if you only do a quarter of it, because that's all your kid was missing, then you don't feel super guilty about spending $150 on a new math program. But go back, find something something kind of cheap, but is going to cover kind of like the basis, and then it will help you see where they are. So you can go through like, hey, do you know how to do this? Yep. Awesome. Great. Move on. You know how to do this? Yep. Awesome. Move on. This, ooh, I'm struggling. That's hard. Okay. This is where we've lost it. Let's work on this section here for a little bit. And if that's all they need, they're like, hey, you got it. We can go back to this now, because now that you know this will be easier. Definitely consider taking it back a level if your kids are feeling like it's too hard. Don't feel bad. Go back and build that firm foundation for them so that they can be successful later on. You'd rather things be slightly easy and then kind of rush through it than be a struggle that is going to cause tears and make them spend hours and fights, and it's just not worth it. The next thing you can try, if you've taken things down, you know you're at the right level, maybe it's time to look for a new curriculum. I rarely recommend looking for a new curriculum off as the first thing, because it is a very expensive thing to do, to constantly change curriculums every time you're facing a struggle. And the grass isn't always greener. So it's not always the best option to automatically go to changing curriculums. But if you have taken down how much time you're doing and you've gone down levels and you're still finding a lot of struggle, it's time to look at your curriculum. And I'm going to say this in terms of like 2 separate options. 1, maybe you need to change your curriculum entirely, and 2, maybe you just need a break. I often recommend taking a break first. Hear me out. Sometimes, especially when you have kids who come from the public system, they are just overwhelmed, and maybe it's just time to do something different. And they just need a little bit of a break from their old curriculum to kind of like, almost like a palate cleansing situation. So if your kids are really frustrated all of a sudden with their like grammar and phonics program or like their reading program, maybe it's time to take a break and do something different. Maybe it's time to like pull out a novel study or do like a unit on poetry or do something that is similar but different. You know what I mean? Same kind of subject, but like totally different. Maybe for your, kids who are struggling with math, maybe it's time to like, hey, we're going to take a break and we're going to do, I know we're working on multiplication. Let's take a break. Let's go do fractions, and we're going to do like a unit on like fractions and baking. Or we're going to do like a unit on, money, and we're going to just work on playing money and doing money games and pull a whole bunch of games that are money related and all of that. maybe that's what you need, is just like a little bit of a break. And there are some great units out there, some great kind of like options. Teacher Pay Teachers is fantastic if you want to just pull random little things that are going to be different. And maybe you want to say, instead of doing your stuff, you're going to take time and do something totally different. Maybe you're going to take time to focus on like a totally different unit, or, find something that's totally an interest to them and just like dive deep into that, or do like a passion project thing. Take some time, do something a little bit different. If after that you go back to your curriculum and it's still an issue, then it's time to look for a new curriculum base entirely. Some kids just don't connect with different programs. That's okay. It's normal. Everyone has their preferences. Everyone has what they connect to. Kids have different learning styles. They need different things. And maybe this program was your favorite and you're like, it is great and it's hitting everything I want, and it's just not doing it for your kid. That's okay. Now is the time to say, hey, it's time to look for something new. And when we're looking for something new, we want to look for things that are going to be a little bit different from what you're doing. So if you have a high mastery program, maybe you want to go to something spiraled. If you have a program that is very like just paper and pencil, maybe you want to go to one that has a lot of manipulatives, or that is very big into like hands-on learning. Maybe it's time to try something new. So, and in that sense, I would totally recommend checking YouTube to see what people are using, and look for like really good recommendations on curriculum, like in terms of like a full, like, here's what this looks like on the inside. If you have friends who homeschool, say, hey, can I see your math book? What do you like about it? What don't you like about it? Tell me about it. That kind of stuff. So that is your chance to kind of change your curriculum. And I always offer it last because it can be expensive to change your curriculum out, especially if it's like mid-year. But sometimes it can be a great thing if that's the problem. And the reason I offer it last is because sometimes it's not the issue. It is the attitude and the frustrations and the trauma behind it. And a lot of parents automatically go to change the curriculum. And if you haven't addressed any of those other issues, doesn't matter what curriculum you put in front of them, it's going to be a problem. And you're going to spend a lot of money on curriculum that you're never going to get through because it was never the curriculum to begin with. Now, if you're like, I've done all this and I'm still struggling, my kids are still struggling with work refusal, I want to also mention that if you have children who have neurodiversities or learning issues, you're going to have struggles more often. And it is important to remember, again, that frustration and refusal is communication, and looking for ways that we can work with our kids who have these different brains and whose brains are just wired differently to help them be as successful as possible. And I see this tons when I'm doing consulting and coaching work, that kids who are neurodiverse, who have ADHD, who are on the spectrum, who have dyslexia, they have different needs, and we need to be able to help them meet their needs and not work against them. And so sometimes it means doing things like finding accommodations for them. Things to consider, especially if you know your kid has one of these diagnoses or you highly suspect it, because it won't hurt to try it. But things like taking extra breaks, having scheduled breaks. We're going to do 15 minutes and then it's going to be a break. 15 minutes and then it's going to be a break. Having really small sessions, like I was saying, 15 minutes and then moving on. Having movement breaks. I was just talking with a client who was saying that she takes her kids for a walk before they do school, and she notices on those days they do better. I'm like, that might have to be like a consistent part of your routine, is that your children with ADHD are going to need to get out and burn a little bit more energy so they can focus, and that they get that movement and are able to get enough stimulation so that they can focus later on. Having some kind of reward at the end of their work session. Sometimes kids with ADHD need an external motivator to keep them going. And sometimes you need to find a reward at the end. Maybe it's going to be, hey, when you're all done, it's going to be 10 minutes of iPad time. Or it's going to be, we're going to go for a walk. Or it's going to be, gummy bears. I don't know. But finding stickers, external motivation. And then the other thing that we definitely want to do is, especially if our kids are struggling or neurodiverse, we want to make sure that we're using technology to help us, because sometimes it just takes them longer to do things and to be able to do things properly. And so if we can find ways to make certain things easier or simpler, then, or more motivating, like they enjoy it more, then let's do it. So if your kid struggles with like writing, but they type and they love typing, let them type their assignments out. If they're struggling with like the spelling aspect of like getting their, like how to spell, and they're trying to write like a paragraph or a story or a response, consider talk to text, because then they don't have to do that spelling and grammar aspect. They can just get their ideas out and you can grade them basically on their ideas, rather than like going through all the struggle of like paper to pencil that they just have a hard time with. If they're struggling with reading and you're like, hey, rather than me getting you to read, let's put an audiobook on. Or let's get an audiobook and the physical copy and like read them at the same time, so you can listen to it and see the words at the same time. Like, let's use technology and its benefits to help our kids, especially when they have neurodiversity and they're struggling. So that's what I have to say. If your kids are dealing with work refusal, those are kind of like the biggest, most common scenarios. And I hope this was helpful, and I hope that it helps not eliminate because they're going to happen, but I hope it gives you a pathway of how to handle work refusal in the future. And I think if we remember that refusal and frustration is a form of communication, it takes that power struggle out for us as parents and our kids. And I think that by reframing work refusal and frustration from a fighting to a form of communication, we take that power struggle out between them and us, and we can definitely work with a conversation and find solutions when you have a conversation. And so let's remember that frustration is communication, and that if we can listen and work with them, we can minimize the days that our kids are refusing to work. Thank you so much for watching. Make sure you subscribe, click the bell to get notifications. Consider becoming a member. Members get tons of really cool, awesome perks, bonus videos, early releases, and make sure you follow us on Facebook, TikTok, and Instagram to see what is coming up and what we're doing in our home. Thank you so much, and I'll see you guys next week. Bye.